A few weeks after losing a companion, some cats stop eating for a while. Some search the house, room by room, over and over, checking spots where the other cat used to sleep. Some go quiet in a way their owner has never seen before, sitting for long stretches near a favorite window or an empty bed, doing nothing in particular, just present in a way that feels different from ordinary rest. And for a long time, the general assumption, even among a lot of vets, was that this was just coincidence, just stress from a change in routine. Nothing you could really call grief, because grief requires understanding death, and surely a cat cannot understand that. But the research over the last several years has started telling a very different story, one that suggests cats experience something real, something measurable, and something that looks a lot more like mourning than anyone expected. So today, we are asking the question directly, do cats grieve? And if they do, what does it actually look like from the inside, both when they lose another cat and when they lose you? If you are new here, welcome to Cat Rules, where we take the actual science behind these questions and explain it the way a friend would, not a textbook. Let's get into it. Let's start with the research itself, because this is not just speculation dressed up as fact. One of the most cited studies on this topic, conducted by researchers at Oregon State University, surveyed a large number of multi-pet households after the death of a cat or dog in the home. The results were striking. A significant majority of surviving cats showed measurable behavioral changes following the loss of a companion animal, including changes in eating patterns, sleeping patterns, vocalization, and how much time they spent seeking out human attention. Around 2/3 of surviving pets reduced their food intake, more than half slept noticeably more, and a large portion became either more clingy toward their remaining family or noticeably more withdrawn. These are not vague, subjective impressions from emotionally invested owners. They are consistent, repeatable patterns observed across a large sample of households, which is exactly the kind of evidence that moves a phenomenon from anecdote into something researchers take seriously. Now, here is the important nuance, because this is where a lot of the debate actually lives. Does a cat understand death, the abstract, permanent concept of it, the way an adult human does? Almost certainly not, and being honest about that distinction matters, because overstating it in the other direction does a disservice to the real science. What a cat almost certainly does understand is absence, specifically a sudden, sustained, unexplained break in an established pattern that their entire nervous system was built around detecting. Remember, cats are creatures of routine to an extraordinary degree. They track scent, sound, movement patterns, and social structure within their environment constantly, largely on an unconscious level. When another cat who was part of that daily pattern simply stops appearing, stops contributing their scent to shared spaces, stops showing up at the same times in the same spots, that absence registers as a significant, ongoing disruption, and the resulting stress response looks, behaviorally, remarkably similar to what we would call grief in a human context, even if the underlying cognitive experience is not identical. Let's talk about what this actually looks like day to day, because recognizing it matters if you are living through it with your own cat right now. Searching behavior is one of the most commonly reported signs. A surviving cat repeatedly checking the deceased companion's favorite spots, the specific corner of the couch, the top of a particular cat tree, the spot by a certain window, sometimes meowing in those locations in a way that seems distinctly different from their normal vocalization, lower, more drawn out, almost questioning in tone. Appetite changes are extremely common and can go in either direction. Some grieving cats eat noticeably less for a period of days to weeks, while others may actually eat more, seemingly using food as a source of comfort or as a way to fill unstructured time that used to involve interacting with the missing companion. Sleep patterns shift too, often toward more sleep overall, sometimes in unusual locations, particularly spots that carry the missing companion's scent, since scent lingers for a meaningful period and appears to offer some comfort during this adjustment window. Social behavior toward the remaining humans in the household often changes as well. and this is one of the more emotionally resonant parts of the research for a lot of owners. Many surviving cats become noticeably more affectionate and attention-seeking toward their people during this period, following them room to room, initiating contact more frequently, seeming almost unwilling to be left alone even briefly. Researchers interpret this as the cat redirecting social and attachment needs that used to be partially met by the departed companion toward the remaining relationships available to them, which, when you sit with it for a moment, is a genuinely touching thing to realize is happening in your own living room. Now let's shift to the other half of this question, because it is the part almost nobody talks about directly, but almost every cat owner eventually wonders about. What happens inside a cat when they lose you, their person, rather than another cat? This version of loss is harder to study directly, for obvious ethical and practical reasons, but there is meaningful evidence from related situations, extended absences, hospitalizations, and unfortunately, in some documented rescue and shelter intake cases involving cats whose owners had passed away or become permanently unable to care for them. What emerges from that evidence is a pattern that echoes and in some ways intensifies everything we just covered about losing another cat. Remember what we know about attachment from our previous discussions on this topic, that cats build detailed, layered bonds with specific people based on voice, scent, consistency, and shared experience, particularly moments of vulnerability where that person showed up reliably. When that specific person disappears from a cat's life permanently, the disruption is not just behavioral, it appears to have a genuine physiological component as well. Cats separated from a primary attachment figure have been observed showing elevated stress hormone markers, changes in immune function, and behavioral patterns consistent with what veterinary behaviorists describe as a grief or mourning response, including decreased appetite, increased vocalization, disrupted sleep, and in some documented cases, a period of what looks very much like searching behavior directed specifically at spaces and objects associated with that person. A favorite chair, a specific side of the bed, an item of clothing carrying their scent. If you are finding this kind of research genuinely fascinating and honestly a little emotional, that is exactly the kind of content this channel exists to bring you. So go ahead and subscribe if you have not already, because there is a part of this conversation coming up about what you can actually do to help a grieving cat, and it might surprise you how much of it is within your control. Let's talk about the biological mechanism underneath all of this, because understanding it helps make sense of why the response can be so intense, and why it is not something a cat can simply choose to switch off once you explain to them, in whatever way you could, that the loss is permanent. Cats form attachment bonds through oxytocin, the same hormone system involved in human bonding, and through consistent positive associations built into their nervous system over months and years, essentially a learned expectation that this specific person or animal reliably provides safety, comfort, and predictability. When that source of safety disappears suddenly, the cat's nervous system does not have a mechanism to simply update the expectation instantly, the way an adult human can consciously process new information about a permanent loss. Instead, the expectation persists for a period. The cat continues, on some level, anticipating the return of that person or companion, checking familiar spots, listening for familiar sounds, and the gap between that persistent expectation and the actual ongoing absence is where a great deal of the observed stress behavior comes from. Over time, weeks to a few months in most documented cases, that expectation does gradually update, and behavior typically returns to something closer to baseline, though the timeline varies considerably from cat to cat, depending on the strength of the original bond, the cat's individual temperament, and how much environmental stability remains available to them during that adjustment period. This actually connects to a broader question worth addressing directly. Why does grief severity seem to vary so much between individual cats? Part of the answer lies in exactly what we have already covered: bond strength. A cat who had a deep, long-established attachment to the specific companion or person lost will generally show a more pronounced response than a cat whose relationship with that individual was more casual or recent. But temperament plays a real role too. More anxious, sensitive cats, the ones who already tend to be highly attuned to environmental changes and routine disruptions in general, tend to show more visible distress responses to loss than naturally more resilient, adaptable individuals, even when the actual depth of the underlying bond was comparable. This does not mean a less visibly distressed cat cared less. It often simply means their individual coping style expresses itself differently, sometimes more internally in ways that are genuinely harder for an owner to observe and easy to mistake for indifference. So what can you actually do, whether you are supporting a cat through the loss of a companion animal, or, in the more difficult scenario, a cat who has lost their primary person and is now adjusting to a new caregiver? First, maintain routine as consistently as possible. We've talked before about how much cats rely on predictable patterns, and this becomes even more critical during a period of grief, because a stable, unchanging routine gives their nervous system fewer additional variables to process while they are already managing significant disruption. Keep feeding times, play times, and general household rhythm as close to normal as you can. Second, resist the urge to immediately replace the loss, whether that means rushing to bring home a new companion animal or expecting a rehomed cat to instantly bond with a new person the way they bonded with their previous one. Give the grieving process genuine time, generally somewhere in the range of a few weeks to a couple of months, depending on the individual cat, before introducing major new changes, because layering a significant new adjustment on top of an already disrupted nervous system tends to prolong distress rather than resolve it. Third, increase quiet, low-pressure availability rather than forced interaction. This echoes what we know about respecting a cat's autonomy and building trust generally, but it matters even more during grief specifically. Be present, be nearby, offer gentle contact when they seek it, but avoid forcing play, forcing affection, or trying to cheer them up through intense, high-energy interaction, which can actually increase stress rather than relieve it during this particular window. Fourth, preserve scent for a period, rather than immediately washing everything associated with a lost companion or removing every trace of them from the environment. This might sound counterintuitive if your instinct is to minimize reminders of the loss, but for a cat, that lingering scent appears to provide genuine comfort during the adjustment period, rather than reopening distress, and a gradual, staggered removal of scent-carrying items over several weeks tends to support the transition better than an abrupt, complete removal all at once. Fifth, and this applies specifically if you are the new caregiver for a cat who has lost their previous person, patience matters more than almost anything else here. Building a new primary attachment bond takes real time, often significantly longer than most new owners expect, and pushing for immediate closeness, however well-intentioned, tends to backfire. Everything we have covered in previous videos about earning a cat's trust, calm, consistent tone, respecting boundaries, being a steady presence during vulnerable moments, applies here with extra weight, because you are essentially helping a grieving nervous system slowly build a new sense of safety from a place of real loss, not starting from a neutral baseline. There is a myth that comes up constantly whenever this topic gets discussed, the idea that cats are simply too independent, too aloof, too self-contained to actually grieve the way a dog might, and that any behavioral changes after a loss are purely about disrupted routine rather than anything resembling genuine emotional response. This framing tends to come from comparing cats directly to dogs who display more outwardly obvious, easily readable social behavior, and concluding that quieter, subtler responses must mean less depth of feeling underneath. But subtlety is not the same as absence, and everything we have covered in previous videos about how cats actually communicate, low-key body language, scent-based bonding, quiet proximity seeking rather than dramatic displays, should already tell you that cats simply express internal states differently than dogs do, not less intensely differently. The behavioral data itself does not support the idea that cats care less. It supports the idea that their grief looks different, less demonstrative, more internalized, easier for an outside observer to miss entirely if they are only watching for the kind of obvious distress a dog might show. Independence and attachment are not opposites in feline psychology. A cat can be genuinely self-sufficient in daily life and still have formed a deep, specific bond that leaves a real, measurable gap when it disappears. Let's talk about what a healthy recovery timeline actually tends to look like, because knowing roughly what to expect can ease a lot of owner anxiety during this period. In most documented cases involving the loss of a companion animal, the most intense phase of behavioral change, reduced appetite, disrupted sleep, active searching behavior, tends to peak within the first 1 to 2 weeks and then begin gradually easing over the following month. By around 6 to 8 weeks, most cats show a noticeable return toward their individual baseline, even if some subtle differences, perhaps slightly more affection, seeking toward remaining family, or a lingering preference for a spot that used to belong to the departed companion, persist longer term as a kind of quiet, permanent adjustment rather than ongoing acute distress. The timeline for losing a primary human attachment figure tends to run longer and more variably, often extending over several months before a new baseline fully establishes itself, particularly if the cat is also adjusting to an entirely new home and caregiver simultaneously, which adds a second major disruption layered directly on top of the original loss. Knowing these rough windows matters mainly so you can distinguish between normal, expected grief that is gradually easing on its own timeline, which mostly calls for patience and support, and a response that seems to be worsening rather than improving over these windows, which increasingly points toward either a deeper attachment disruption needing more active intervention or an underlying medical issue that deserves direct veterinary attention rather than continued waiting. Here is something worth sitting with. If your cat could understand, even partially, that you noticed their grief, that you slowed down and gave them space and time rather than rushing them through it, do you think that would matter to them? The research increasingly suggests it does. It is worth being honest about one more thing, because pretending otherwise would not serve you well if you are actually living through this right now. Sometimes what looks like grief is actually, or also, a medical issue, and this distinction matters enormously. Decreased appetite, lethargy, and behavioral withdrawal are also hallmark signs of underlying illness, and the timing of a household loss does not automatically rule out a coexisting health problem that genuinely needs veterinary attention. If a grieving cat's decreased appetite persists beyond a few days, or if any of these symptoms seem severe rather than gradually improving over the following weeks, a veterinary check is essential, not optional. Because attributing everything to grief when something medical is actually happening underneath it can mean a treatable condition goes unaddressed during an already difficult time. This overlaps closely with something we have discussed before regarding senior and vulnerable cats specifically, which is part of why having a clear plan for recognizing a genuine medical emergency versus ordinary emotional adjustment matters so much. And it is exactly the kind of situation our senior and disabled cat emergency guide was built to help you navigate. Link down in the description if that is relevant to what you are dealing with right now. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I know this might be a hard one for some of you. Has your cat gone through a loss, another cat, another pet, or even a person in your household? And did you notice anything we talked about today? The searching, the changed appetite, the extra clinginess, the quiet. Drop it in the comments if you are comfortable sharing, because this is genuinely one of those topics where reading through other people's experiences helps more than almost anything a video alone can offer. And a lot of owners going through this right now feel more alone in it than they need to. If this video gave you a little more understanding or a little more patience for what your cat might be going through, that is exactly what we make these for. Subscribe if you have not already, because we have a lot more of this kind of content coming. The real, honest kind, not just the easy, cheerful stuff. We will see you in the next one. And if your cat is grieving right now, give them a little extra time and a little extra grace. They are working through something real, even if they cannot tell you in words. And so, in their own quiet way, are you.